Alrighty folks, want to welcome you back to another video from Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. So, I'm back to a subject I've covered quite a few times, but this is the rabbit hole year at Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. This is a subject I've covered a lot of times, is your cases. What's a server, what's not a server, case sizes, minimum size you kind of want, slim factor, full factor, little mini like I have an unboxing of that I've mentioned several times, server, I've shown you server cases. This is kind of a thing that came up this year that I've mentioned before. This is kind of now time you don't need a SATA drive. So, wanted to bring this big beast out and show you. Now, all of this that we have, what is relevant, what is not relevant anymore. So this is where the rabbit hole effect came in for a case. I've already gone through CPU and motherboard. I already did an unboxing on that little tiny computer I have and what I use for captures. Talked about M.2 slots, NVMe, SATA. Now I'm talked about how SATA drives like this are not really needed anymore and are not really the best thing to have anymore. Because now you have the M.2 that are actually on the motherboards. So now you can actually put the drives directly on the motherboards, and most people don't need a CD-ROM or DVD player. So that's what's in this top bay. You have all these extra bays in this case that really, what do you need them for? I have a SATA drive in there with the dual mounting rack, so you can put two SATA drives in this one bay. Have an old-fashioned spinning mechanical. This is probably the layout in most people's computers. If you're doing gaming and you're doing other stuff, that is not a brand new modern PC. The new modern standard PC is most likely an M.2 on the board and a SATA drive. You might have this also in there for your other data, depending on what your case structure is. Again, now you can go out and buy a 4 terabyte M.2 NVMe drive. And again, the new boards can support multiple M.2s. So this is where this case structure kind of falls apart. Depending on what kind of add-on card you want to do, if you're a gamer and you got to have your 4090 or 4080, you're going to need a big case. And there's other reasons involved in this case other than just this. With this factor being gone, opens up a whole nother factor involved. And I'm sure if you've watched any of these new builds and any of these new videos, you're realizing a lot of them don't have this anymore. They might have a little spots down here on the bottom for you to put your drives. Some of them have them up top, but usually this is all empty and open. And you'll find there's fans here that blow air in. The newer computers we got that I've seen and worked on have fans here that blow all in. There's nothing here. It had a mount here and a couple mounts here. Some of them only have the drives on the bottom for a very specific reason. Because they have a mesh on top so you can put your radiator if you're water cooled. And to me, that is kind of another subject that has been going on and on and on that has now become more standard, that with this development kind of puts the standard of what I've done for 30 plus years on edge and out of the way, and now you have a new structure, a new form. You can go watch the other videos of people building the new computers. You'll understand exactly what the case looks like. But if you're buying a cheaper, standardized case, odds are it's going to be something similar to this. Those are the higher end cases with the glass panels and the high through air so you could see all your LED lighting and all your backlighting and all of those type of cases. You can go out and get cases that are pretty much clear panels almost all the way around so you can see in. With removable panels for you to put in vent. There's a million options out there now. So it kind of pushed me into doing another video, because with it being the rabbit hole year, this kind of seemed like a logical thing for the rabbit hole, because you might get the wrong thing and you might get in too deep on what you want. Because knowing what you have, knowing where your power supply is, knowing where your cooling is going to be, what kind of cooling, a lot of those type of things. As you know, for most new cases, the power supply is usually down here on the bottom. Down there on the bottom usually has also the bays for your drives. Most of them, some of them are this way, some of them have the backside that actually opens. So that's another variable here on these cases. This one only has this panel that opens. A lot of them have where you can run all of this wire underneath and in the back of this case. I think this one only opens. But it actually has a panel in the back you can open. So you can run all the wiring behind all of this and hide it so you have a cleaner view, because now you have clear panels. So I wanted to go through and touch base on that on the case, because you'll see if you watch some of these videos where they talk about certain motherboards, how the ports and where the pin structures are to plug certain things in, which way they're facing outwards, side vertically, how they're facing, and how they fit in a case, and how you route those wires can be issues. So that's the rabbit hole of a case. Things have gotten more complicated on as simple as a case. Because now you don't run your wires like this. You don't do that anymore. Now it's all run through a slot and behind a panel and down. But again, if you don't have any of this, it frees up a lot of this. You don't have power cables. You don't have any of this stuff running here anymore because you don't need it. Makes a cleaner form. Not to mention, in the old days, they were used to talk about the airflow. You want the airflow to go through. This hasn't been a problem since we went with SATA and we went to these little cables. When we had the big fat IED cables, you would have a lot of issues with airflow. Especially depending on how many drives you put in there. If you put 4 or 5 drives in there and you had SATA cables that ran all over, not SATA cables, IED cables, you had an airflow problem. If you had 5 or 6 SATA cables in there, it's not that bad. It looks ugly this way. It's not clean. You can do some wire management and clean it up, but you didn't have the airflow problems. So that's part of the cooling. That I'll cover more also in the cooling video. The rabbit holes of the cooling. With this, you have a couple little more issues without having all of this, and you have so many fans. Of course, you have your power supply. You need to make sure you have enough power supply. You need to have enough connectors to power it. You got to have enough headers on your board or a controller to control all those fans. And how many slots do you have for fans? Like this one has, you can add 2 fans to the back. I've mentioned that before on my videos that you can buy cases of pre-built computers that really are designed for a fan in a certain spot, and there is no fan. This one here in the front has a spot for 2 fans. So for optimal cooling, you should have the 2 fans in the front, the 2 fans in the back to draw the air through. But what this one is only really relying on is the fan and the power supply to circulate the air. That is part of the cooling video. But that is also part of your case. Because if you're not going air cool and you're going water cool, you need to mount the radiator and all of those items. So having the proper case to hold that equipment in there is where the rabbit hole effect is. Because if you want to go water cool and you want to go 10 SATA drives and you want to go water cool in the front and you don't have anything in the front, where are you going to mount your drives? Now, depending on pretty ugly, nice SATA drives aren't really a problem to mount. If you have the board that can support it, I've seen computer builds where they physically put double-sided tape and stick it to the bottom plate and put it down on the bottom. It's a SATA drive that has no spinning, mechanical, moving parts. I've seen them just laying in there loose. Of course, that's not pretty, that's not nice. I'm sure you can probably find an old bay, couple mounts where you can mount 2 of them, mount those down with 2 drives in there, make it look nice. I'm sure you can do something to make it look nice if you needed those features. But again, that is where it comes down to your case, because you might not have all of this because you need a different feature. Knowing how you can adapt it, knowing what will fit. If you buy a little tiny short case and you're trying to jam your power supply, your motherboard, and all this other stuff in there, you're going to run into a problem. Then you're going to run into cooling issues. So this is where that wormhole, rabbit hole effect is. Because then what CPU are you running? If you go and you look at some of these heatsink options out there, they're pretty big that go onto that CPU. You might need this space in the case to mount a fan cooler. So this is what I wanted to cover in this video. I'm pretty sure I've covered it a lot in a lot of the other videos, but due to SATA drives pretty much looking like they're obsolete, not really needed, they're kind of a middle point now, because now you can get the M.2 drives, multiple ones on a board. I've seen them where they support 4 on a single motherboard, 2 on the front, 2 on the back of the actual motherboard. when you open up that back panel, there's a slot cut open in the case where you can actually access those drives. Knowing it goes back to your case. This is where you were hearing me talk about other components and parts that come back to your case, the inside of your case, the layout of your case. Knowing those factors is kind of where the wormhole, or why do I keep saying wormhole? Rabbit hole is at. I've talked about back panels for your expansion, having your future growth. Video card, 2 slot, 3 slot width. Some of them I'm hearing are 3 bays deep. A lot of them are 2 bays deep. Having the case that supports that and can handle that. Not only the motherboard, because now you have the motherboard you want, you have the CPU you want, because you watched those 2 videos. Get down to your case. Next video probably coming up will be more on cooling, because those 4 factors all are kind of intertwined. And knowing really your case layout and how everything is can actually change and affect your motherboard choice. I mentioned on there where your radiators are at. Some people mount them on the top. There's a panel up top for you to mount them. Depending on what's on that motherboard, how big that cooling panel is for the back, and all of the CPU, where the CPU is located. Some of them are located pretty high up. And then you want to put a water block, and you want to put your lines, or you want to put a fan. And then you want to not even water cool, you just want fan cool. You want fans, depending on, because remember, this is now down here on some cases. On most cases, that's down here. So this would be the right setup for most cooling in the top, because you would remove this, put that down here. This is where your cooling array is. Your fans, your water block, your straight fans. You want to have the space up here then, or in the front. So I wanted to go through that and go through and show this so you actually can physically see what the differences are. Because again, if you're going from an older computer into a newer computer, you might buy it pre-built and not even know any of this or what's going on. Some of the computers I work on, it's funny because it doesn't have any of this in here. But it has a little front plate, and you physically, if you wanted to mount a hard drive or anything, you mount it to this front plate. You take this piece off, it has where you start the screws, and you can lock it in. Like you hang a picture, or you hang anything else. You put the screws on there and the holes, and you hook it in there. And then you can tighten up the screws so it's tight, I guess. That's where they have the hard drives mounted. Kind of an interesting subject. It's kind of weird because I'm used to this. Been doing this for a long time. Now you can remove this and physically mount your drives right to the front plate here, where your fans are supposed to be. It has a fan in there above it. You might want to mount your drives there and have the fan blow against it, because you're now running a big giant fan instead of a little fan, because it's now the size of your front panel. a lot of variables that are out there right now with these cases. There's a lot of videos out there with case reviews and all of this other stuff. Go on over, do your research, do your homework, and find out exactly what I'm talking about. Go actually physically see these new modern cases. It's funny. I have the video. I can actually pick it up, but it's pretty heavy, of the server case I have. That one's the prime example of where the drives are down here on the bottom. This part is not there. This part's there. This part's not. It's down there on the bottom. So it's not anything new. It's been around. It's not a new layout, design. It's not a surprise. It's not, they're trying to cheat you. It's not, the design's been there. It's just probably nobody's noticed it. Nobody's told you about it. Nobody's pointed it out. Now it's more interesting because you might buy a case that has none of this at all. And it might be an airflow case. It might not even be a water-cooled case that doesn't have spaces for the radiators. Doesn't have a lot of those things. And it's kind of a shocking, like, whole development of a whole case structure that's redesigned. Like when they changed motherboard form factors. It's kind of something that takes a little bit of getting used to seeing when you open a case and there's nothing there. And it could be a big case the same size of this that has literally nothing there except for the motherboard and the power supply. Because of cooling factors and all the other type of things that go on, and this is not needed anymore. But you want this size of a case because it fits where you need it. It's in a rack. It could be a million reasons why you want this size of a case, but what's inside might not be needed anymore. So I think I've gone on long enough with the case on the rabbit hole year and what the ongoing changes are. So that when you buy a computer, you're not surprised if you look in there and you see it. Or you have one of those clear panels and you look in there and there's nothing there. And you go, what? Where's... Because you're used to seeing this stuff. It might not be there. Nowadays, they're not even using these big drives. They're using the little thin laptop drives that are half the size of these. So they might just have that in there, mounted in there in a little slot, and then all of this is empty. It's kind of a unique, interesting experience when you open up a case sometimes and you're like, let me see what they've done. Everything's good. Everything's proper. It's just you're kind of expecting to see this, and you don't. Because it's no longer needed. And if it's a pre-made computer, they already know this isn't going to be needed because the features aren't there to add any of this. So why have it? But they might have just a single slot on the front where you can hang a drive if you need to. So I wanted to point that out because it's a lot of changes and a lot of structured changes to something like a case. That not to take it for granted. Not to assume I'm just going to order this case because it's a good case and not look at what's there. Maybe you only have one drive or two drive slots in the bottom, and maybe they're SATA drive slots and not the big drive slots. So you always want to research that and make sure you know what's there. Because the last thing you want to do is buy that case and there's SATA drive slots and you buy two spinning mechanical drives because you need the storage space and they don't fit. And then you can't really adapt it because it's metal. Maybe there's some that it locks in a certain way where it doesn't matter. Most of them, I think, are still this standard platform size. But you don't want to take the chance. You want to make sure you know what's in your case. Even the ones where they're on the other side, you want to make sure you know what size they are, how many it supports. All right, I want to wrap this one up. I want to thank everybody for watching. Head on over to Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. Watch all the rabbit hole videos for this year. Watch all the old videos. Hit the subscribe, hit the bell. Thank you so much.